We saw in our last segment that the church has a history, and the church has among other things, a doctrinal history. One aspect of the history of the church, the doctrinal history of the church, is the development of the acronym Tulip, which is very important. Just to give a brief overview, in the 16th century, a man by the name of Jacob Arminius appeared on the scene in Holland, and he was, at the time, he belonged to the, at least superficially, the Orthodox. He nominally assented to Orthodox Christianity, but he rebelled against Orthodox Christianity, and his followers were called the Remonstrants. They were called the Remonstrants because they were remonstrating against Orthodox Christianity. And they developed 5 points which have come to be known as the 5 points of Arminianism, taken from the name of their leader, Jacob Arminius. Now, at the time, the lovers of truth were not going to stand for this objection to Orthodox Christianity, because an objection to Orthodox Christianity is an objection to the gospel, and so they convened in the 17th century at what is known as the Synod of Dort, and hammered out clear objections to each of these 5 points of the Remonstrants. Subsequently, these objections to Orthodox Christianity have come to be known as the 5 points, spelled out with the acronym TULIP. Now, these are 5 points, can be stated as 5 points of Christianity, since they are Orthodox Christian truth. The 5 points of the gospel, or the 5 points of truth. And the first point of which is total depravity. In our first session, we explained that man was created in the image of God, among other things, including the fact that man was created with an ability to reason, to think, and subsequent to the fall, he no longer is able to reason and to discover God with his mind. 1 Corinthians 2 says, "The natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God, for they are foolishness unto him. Neither can he know them, for they are spiritually discerned." Secondly, the image of God includes the fact that man, in contradistinction to the animals, is not only able to reason so that he might understand God. Secondly, he was created with an ability to love. He was created with affections, and man's affections were given him so that he might love the God that he understood with his mind. But subsequent to the fall, John 3:19 and 20 says that this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light. Now man, subsequent to the fall, not only does not love God, but he hates God. Thirdly, man in the image of God was created with a will, so that he might make significant decisions. he was created with the ability to choose the God that he understood, the God that he loved, and therefore to walk in the commandments of God. So the old Puritans used to say, the head, which is the mind, the heart, which is the affections, and the will, the feet, which is the will of man. Now, the interesting thing in our generation is that these, though we would expect the enemies of truth to oppose these 5 points, the 5 points are now under attack from those who pretend to be the lovers of truth, the lovers of the gospel, the lovers and the followers of Orthodox Christianity, namely, specifically and especially, the first of the 5 points is presently under attack by those who claim to believe the 5 points, believe it or not. Total depravity, it is being said, does not mean that man is as bad as he can be. I want to just play an excerpt from a major leader in the so-called Reformed Church of our day, who out of one side of his mouth says he adheres to the 5 points, but out of the other side of his mouth, well, let's listen to see what he says about the T in Tulip. Does he believe in total depravity as he says he does? Listen carefully.
You can read statements of the Council of Dort, Westminster Confession, and all kinds of other theological creeds through history, and this is how man is understood biblically. This doctrine has been called total depravity, but I feel that total depravity is a misleading term. If you look up depravity in the dictionary, it's a synonym for viciousness. It's a synonym for being vile. In fact, to be depraved, according to the dictionary, is to be degraded, debased, immoral to a dangerous degree, like rapists and serial killers. The word depraved sort of connotes a level of evil that's just not applicable to everybody. To say someone is totally depraved, you think of Jeffrey Dahmer's or Charles Manson, somebody who has not a vestige of human goodness.
Very interesting, is it not? Is it conceivable that a person who calls himself a communist would, in his advocacy of communism, would open up the dictionary and say, I am a communist, I am an advocate therefore of communism, and now I'm going to prove that. And he opens up the dictionary and he says, communism, he turns to the word communism, reads the definition out of the dictionary, says, this simply is not what communism is. Oh, wait a second. If the definition of communism is not taken from the dictionary, wouldn't it be extreme arrogance to say that, no, the history of the word communism is totally wrong. You need to listen to my understanding of what communism is. Well, that is exactly what is happening in the church today. The doctrine of total depravity is under attack. And you may have noticed that this very same preacher that we just listened to introduced his idea of total depravity by saying that this concept of sin has been taught throughout the history of the church in confessions such as the Westminster Confession of Faith. And so he says he adheres to the Westminster Confession on the doctrine of sin. Well, here's what the Westminster Confession states about total depravity. in chapter 6 on the fall of man. It says, at the fall, man, meaning Adam and Eve, they fell from their original righteousness and communion with God, and so became dead in sin and wholly defiled in all the faculties and parts of soul and body. So we are told by these reformed leaders of our day that total depravity does not mean that the sinner is as bad as he can be. What does the Westminster Confession of Faith say? Total depravity teaches that man became wholly, which is to say completely defiled in all the faculties and parts of soul and body. In the fourth paragraph of chapter 6 of the Westminster Confession, it further explains man's condition in sin by saying this: from this original corruption, whereby we are utterly indisposed, disabled, and made opposite to all good. We are told by these modern so-called believers in the tea of Tulip that total depravity does not mean that the sinner is as bad as he can be. However, the Westminster Confession says that at the fall man was made opposite to all good. Now, what could possibly be worse than being made opposite to all good? So indeed, according to confessional Christianity, total depravity does teach that the sinner is as bad as he can be. He is the exact opposite to all good. And we plan to continue in our discussion in our next session of the 5 points of Christianity, the 5 points of the gospel, or the 5 points of truth. Amen.